One is simply fear of change. If what AAAS and NAS say is true, then it sure sounds like we may be in for some really big lifestyle changes. So it's natural to just tune it out. If global climate change is really as much of a big, ugly beast as science says it might be, that really threatens the status quo, which people assume would throw millions of people's lives into turmoil and change. So they resist the conclusion because they're afraid of it, not because they understand it. I know personally when I talk to people about climate change, I'm always very anxious of being criticized and dismissed for using scare tactics, which for some reason is a fatal criticism. Once someone slaps that label on you, your credibility is destroyed and no one will listen to you unless they already believe what you have to say. But can't you imagine a possible situation in which perhaps you aren't scared enough for your own good? Couldn't scare tactics be a positive thing then? I read a totally engrossing newspaper column a year or so ago entitled "If Only Gay Sex Caused Global Warming" by Daniel Gilbert. He's a psychologist, and his basic point was that the human brain is conditioned to respond to threats that are immediate, quick, visible, and personal. I call it the saber-toothed tiger reflex. I'm not sure if I just made that up. Let me know. He said, quote, "We accept gradual changes that we would reject if they happened abruptly. If climate change had been visited on us by a brutal dictator or an evil empire, the war on warming would be this nation's top priority. When terrorists attack, we respond with crushing force and firm resolve, just as our ancestors would have. Global warming is a deadly threat precisely because it fails to trip the brain's alarm, leaving us soundly asleep in a burning bed. It remains to be seen if we can learn to rise to new occasions." End quote. And there's the hitch. Our way of dealing with problems, by being reactive to them, has worked out okay for us as a species so far. When we've really blown it somewhere, we could always just move on to new ground. But now, with 6 billion people and technology that changes the whole bloody planet, there's nowhere to run to, nowhere to hide. Which creates another psychological stumbling block. If a situation is too big to comprehend or too threatening, then our screen just goes blank. Who amongst us has not stuck our head in the sand and ignored a terribly pressing problem, subconsciously hoping it will just go away, and yet dreading the time of reckoning when it must be faced, knowing all along the situation will only be worse for our inattention, but still not being able to rouse ourselves to action? And then there's the dynamic of confirmation bias, which I detailed in the video Nature of Science, where we pay more attention to the evidence which supports what we already believe and less attention to the evidence which contradicts it. This explains what was a very puzzling discovery for me. I came across a poll about public attitudes towards global climate change, and it showed there was a significant split across party lines in terms of the percentage of people who believe that humans are causing the globe to warm up. Now, you probably don't find it surprising that more Democrats than Republicans believe in global warming, and I ordinarily wouldn't either. But I've been steeping myself in this question of how do you go about deciding what to believe about what's going on in the physical world. And this split along party lines about a physical reality just sort of blew me away. Why the heck should political belief influence one's assessment of what is physically real? I just got this ridiculous picture in my head of a Democrat and a Republican standing and looking out the same window. The Democrat saying, "Gee, it's pouring out there." And the Republican saying, "No, it's a sunny blue day." And of course the greenie saying, "Hey, let me see." So how does confirmation bias explain that split? It's fair to say that Republicans have a greater distaste for government than Democrats. And if climate change is really being caused by humans, that strongly implies the need for more government action. A Republican would rather not see this happen, and so confirmation bias ends up making more of the global warming as a hoax evidence stick and less of the global warming as a problem evidence. Although along the lines of confirmation bias, I can't tell you how many times a skeptic has posted a comment along the lines of, here are three movies on YouTube you must see. They all prove how global warming is a hoax. It's true that films like The Great Global Warming Swindle and An Inconvenient Truth are exactly those sorts of evidence that can strongly feed confirmation bias. And you can bet that the fans of each movie have a pretty strong political profile, despite the significant differences in how the two movies have stood up to analysis by credible sources. That's probably because we're not in the habit of going out of our way to see if we're wrong. Really, who likes to be shown they're wrong? If you're a fan of An Inconvenient Truth, how much research have you done into the critiques of the movie? How about if you're in the Great Global Warming Swindle camp? Have you looked up some of the really embarrassing goofs the filmmakers made, like filling in the blanks on some of the scientific graphs? Oops. Do some open-minded Googling there, and you may be stunned. And plus, you'll also learn not to include four-letter words in any private emails if you're a controversial figure. Whichever movie you're a fan of, you owe it to yourself. If you can only find weak critiques that are easily dismissed, that increases your esteem for your favorite movie. And if you find there are a bunch of fatal flaws in your movie, then thank goodness you found out now rather than later, and you can dump that stinker as fast as possible. It's just natural when you go about collecting evidence and arguing again and again to become really convinced yourself and lose the ability to see that perhaps you could be wrong. Perhaps someone else does make a valid point. I know it's happened to me as I've steeped myself in the evidence and arguments in writing these videos. More than once I caught myself thinking, my God, how could anyone not be convinced? So it is a difficult but very worthy skill to step back and clear the board, saying to yourself, okay, I'll pretend I haven't formed an opinion yet. Let's see how the arguments stack up against each other. I try to aspire to that, although I'm not always as successful as I'd like to be. In fact, as hard as I try to form watertight conclusions, I still hope I'm wrong, which is an idea so important it got its own video. How it all ends, I hope I'm wrong.